So we always feel very blessed and fortunate when our dear eldest brother Nirod comes to join us here on Sunday mornings. And it's very nice that so many of you have come along with him from Pondi. Familiar faces and new faces. Nirod was here at the beginning of September, and he started reading from an essay of Nolini on Savitri. And I think today you will finish it. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Our philosopher friend, you know him very well now, Arindam. We called him. He has recently returned from America. And he had a wonderful experience there. It would have been very interesting if he had told you in this meeting all these experiences. But I hope when he regains his stamina, he might visit you and talk about it. Meanwhile, it is the insistence of our friend. He insisted that I should finish the half the portion that is left before something happens. There are others who will take up what is left, so there is no question of losing your connection with the ashram. There is our friend, young friend, Jhumur, who is growing up and make contact with you. She had a long contact with the mother from her childhood. Now, without...
This is page 267, where we stopped.
267.
267.
I think you remember the first part. Still, let me read the last part, portion of the first one, so that you may get the context. You know this story by now of what Savitri is about. Once more, Savitri, even like Ashwapati, has to make a choice between two destinies. All of us have to make choices at one time or another. You have choice between two destinies. Although the choice is already made, even before it is offered to her. What is the choice? Ashwapati had to abandon, we know, the silent, immutable, transcendent status of pure light in order to bathe in the lower earthly light from heaven to earth. Savitri too, as the prototype of human consciousness, chose and turned to this light of the earth. That is the big sacrifice. The Rishi of the Upanishad declared, they who worship only ignorance. This is a very famous mantra shloka. Enter into darkness. But they who worship knowledge alone enter into a still darker darkness. I think some of you if I am right, asked a question on this. However, this world of absolute light, which Savitri names everlasting day, you remember that the last canto of Savitri, is what the Upanishadic Rishi sees and describes as the golden lid upon the face of the sun. Hiranmayeno patreno, golden lid covering the sun, the supreme. I think Hiranmayeno patreno opihitam mukham. So describes as the golden lid upon the face of the sun. The sun is the complete, integral light of the truth. Complete, integral light of the truth in its fullness. The golden covering lid has to be removed. If one is to see the sun itself, to live the integral life, one has to possess the integral truth. So it is that Savitri comes down upon earth and standing upon its welcoming soil speaks to Satyavan as though consoling him for having abandoned their own abode to heaven to dwell among mortal men. A big sacrifice. Hiranmayeno patreno satyasya, satyam is truth, opihitam mukham, covered up. So you remove that patra. Here is the quotation, heaven's touch fulfills, but cancels not our earth. Still am I she who came to thee mid the murmur of the sunlit leaves upon this forest verge. You remember their first meeting. All that I was before, I am to thee still. There has been no change. Voicing Satyavan's thought and feeling, all humanity, the whole world in joy and gratefulness, utters the mantra of thanksgiving. What is the mantra? If this is she of whom the world has heard, wonder no more at any happy change. So this is the first part. So she is there, wonder no more. Nalinita goes on, in her prayers and meditations, the mother says, you people know French, I think, or some of you don't know. I read then the translation. Since the man refused the meal I had prepared with so much love and care, I invoked the God to take it. What is the meal Mother has prepared? My God, Thou hast accepted my invitation. Thou hast come to sit at my table, and in exchange for my poor and humble offering, Thou hast granted to me the last liberation. Now he is explaining what is this meal? What is this banquet that she prepared for man and which man refused? It is nothing else than the life divine here below, the life of the gods enjoying immortality, full of the supreme light and power, love and delight. Man refused because for him it is something too high, too great. Being a creature, earthbound and of small dimensions, he can seize and appreciate only small things. Like specks of a material world, he refused. First of all, because of his ignorance, he does not know, nor is he capable of conceiving that there are such things as immortal life, divinity, unobscured light, griefless love, or a radiant, tranquil, invisible energy. He does not know, and yet he is arrogant. Arrogant in his little knowledge, his petty power, in his blind self-sufficiency. Furthermore, besides ignorance and arrogance, there is an element of revolt in him. For in his half-wakefulness, with his rudimentary consciousness, if ever he came in contact with something that is above and beyond him, if a shadow of another world happens to cross his threshold, he is not at peace, does not want to recognize, but denies and even curses it. That is humanity. The Divine Mother brings solace and salvation. For the grace, it is such a small and easy thing. It is a wonder how even such a simple, natural, inconspicuous thing could be refused by anybody. If man finds no use for the gift she has brought down for him, naturally she will take it back and return it to him to whom it belongs. For all things belong to the Supreme Lord. Even she belongs to him, as she is one with him. The Gita says, there is nothing else than the Brahman in the creation, the doer, the doing, and the deed. All are essentially He. In the sacrifice, that is this moving, acting universe, the offerer, the offering, and the offered, each and every element is the Brahman. Brahma Arpanam Brahma Havihi. This gesture of the Divine Mother teaches us also what should be the approach and attitude of human beings in all their activities. In all our movements, we should always remember Him, refer to Him. Consider that in the last analysis, each and every movement comes from Him, and we must always offer them to Him. Return them to the parent source from where they come. They are in His freedom, the divine detachment, which the individual must possess always in order to be one with Him, feel one's identity with Him. Man's refusal of the divine grace has been depicted very beautifully and graphically in a perfect dramatic form by Sri Aurobindo in Savitri. The refusal comes one by one from the three constituent parts of the human being. First of all, man is a material being, a bodily creature. As such, he is a being of ignorance and misery, of brutish blindness. He does not know that there is something other than his present state of misfortune and dark fate. He is not even aware that there may be anything higher or nobler than the ugliness he is steeped in. He lives on earth life with an earth consciousness, moves mechanically and helplessly through vicissitudes over which he has no control. Even as the material life is not a mere despicable thing, behind its darkness, behind its sadness, behind all its infirmities, the Divine Mother is upholding and infusing into it her grace and her beauty. Indeed, she is one with this world of sorrowness. She has in effect become it in her infinite pity and love, so that this material body of hers may become conscious of its divine substance and manifest her true form. But the human being, individualized and separated in egoistic consciousness, has lost the sense of his inner reality and is vocal only in regard to his outward formulation. It is natural for physical man, therefore, to reject and deny the physical Godhead in him, he even curses it and wants to continue as he is. He wails, therefore, in ignorance and anguish. Here are the lines. Some of you will remember when Savitri was in search, he met these personalities one by one. First of all, the man of sorrows. I am the man of sorrows. I am he who is nailed on the white cross of the universe. I toil like the animal die. I am man the rebel, man the helpless serf. I know my fate will ever be the same. It is my nature's work that cannot change. I was made for evil. Evil is my lot. Evil I must be, and by evil live. Not other can I do, but be myself. What nature made, that I must remain. The divine glory manifests itself for a moment to the earthly consciousness, but man refuses to be pulled out of its pigsty. The grace withdraws, but in its supreme consciousness of unity and love, consoles the fallen creature and gives it the assurance, one day I will return, a bringer of strength. Misery shall pass, abolished from the earth. The world shall be freed from the anger of the beast. The basic status or foundation of man, in fact of creation, is earth. The material organization. After the body, next comes the life and life power. Here man attains a larger dynamic being of energy and creative activity. Here too, on this level, what man is or what he achieves is only a reflection, a shadow, but mostly a misshapen resemblance, an aberration of the divine reality that hides behind and yet half reveals itself. That Godhead is the mother's form of might. We name it variously Kali, Durga, Lakshmi, for it is her grace that is ultimately expressed and fulfilled in this world of vital power. It is because of this realizing power of the Mother that slowly the light grows greater in the east. Slowly the world progresses on God's road. His seal is on my task. It cannot fail. I shall hear the silver swing of heaven's gates when God comes out to meet the soul of the world. But man, in the strength of his ignorance and arrogance, does not recognize this goddess. Human power, we have said, is a reflection, a shadow of the divine power, and most often it is deformed, a perverted divine power. Man is full of his egoistic, vital self-confidence. Mother has said somewhere, ego is the greatest bar now we have to face. So here He believes it is his own will that is realizing all which is achieved here. Whatever he has created, it is through the might of his own merit. And whatever new creation will be done in the future will be through the grace of his own genius. A mighty vital selfhood obscures his consciousness and he sees nothing else, understands nothing else beyond the reach of that limited vision. This is the Rakshasa, this is the Asura in man. Here is his philosophy of life. I climb a claimant to the throne of heaven. The last born of the earth, I stand the first. Even if he is not, he becomes in me. No magic can surpass my magic skill. There is no miracle I shall not achieve. So there is the Rakshasa and Asura. I remember we were talking the other day. Sri Aurobindo wrote that all my disciples are Asuras, Asuric. Asuric in disposition, not really Asuras, because of the ego. And we, his disciples, are very much upset that we are all Asuric. So, this vital being in man is the Rakshasic hunger and Asuric self-conceit, rejects the divine power that is in fact behind him too, supporting him. The goddess, in the wake of her predecessor, goes back from where she came, leaving, however, a consoling word, assuring that one day she will return. She will bide her time, for one day the cry of the ego shall be hushed within. The lion roar that claims the world as food, all shall be might and bliss and happy force. He is the human being proper. He has attained his own humanity. Here he has received the light of knowledge, a wider and deeper consciousness. He has unveiled the secret mysteries of nature, brought to play hidden forces that were unknown and untapped. All these achievements have been possible for man because it is the mother of light that is behind and has come forward to shed something of a luminous presence around. But man has no inkling of the presence of this luminous deity. His own light has been a screen in front of the inner divine light. It is not possible for the human mind to seize the divine light. It is not possible for the human mind to seize the higher light, his consciousness, his knowledge, is too narrow, too superficial, too dull to comprehend what is beyond. This divine light is also a thing of delight. The consciousness it possesses is also the very essence of joy and felicity. But all that is occult to the human knowledge. Man considers truth is his own property. Whatever truth is there, his understanding can grasp and bring it to play. Truth and reality are commensurate with his own consciousness, his mental comprehension. What others speak of as realities of the spirit, truths transcendental, are an illusion, delusion. That is what is usually known as the scientific mind, the rational consciousness. An orthodox scientific mentality is in the first instance a thing of overweening self-confidence, of arrogant self-assertion. It declares in its formidable pride, I have seized the cosmic energies for my use. I have poured on her infinitesimal elements, and our invisible atoms have unmasked. If God is at work, His secrets I have found. This imperiousness in man seems, however, to be a sheer imperviousness. It is a mask, a hollow appearance, for with all his knowledge, at the end he has attained no certainty, no absoluteness. There is something behind all the outer bravado. He flourishes, has a sense of helplessness, at times almost as pitiable as that of a child, for he finds at last all is a speculation or a dream. In the end, the world itself becomes a doubt. It is true, his survey of the universe, his knowledge of boundless nature, and the inexhaustible multiplicities of creation have given him a sense of the endless and the infinite, but he has not the necessary light or capacity to follow those lines of infinity. On the contrary, there is a shrinking in him at the touch of such vastness. His small humanity makes him desperately earthbound. His aspiration follows the lines of least resistance. Our smallness saves us from the infinite in a frozen grandeur, lone and desolate. Call me not to die the great eternal death. Human I am, human let me remain, till in the inconscient I fall dumb and asleep. This goddess too is rejected like her previous comrades. The mother of light, the deity who is probably the guide and ruler of man's own destiny, Even she is refused, but hers is not to complain. In tranquil quietness she brings comfort, hope to the troubled human mind, and says she goes to come back in the fullness of her incarnation. She utters divinely, "One day I shall return, his hands in mine, and thou shalt see the face of the Absolute. Then shall the holy marriage be achieved. Then shall the divine family be born." There is one page more. To the inconscient and ignorant human nature, Savitri, the divine's delegate, presents the powers and personalities that are behind man's present infirmities. These broken images of true realities lying scattered about in the front of existence. Man will be made conscious. He is being made conscious step by step, precisely by such relations from time to time. The Vedic image is that of the eternal succession of dawns. Some of you know perhaps succession of dawns, eternal, infinite. The Vedic image is that of the eternal succession of dawns, whose beginning no one knows, nor the end. That creation proceeds from light to light, from consciousness to higher reaches of consciousness, from the material life through the vital and the mental life. It first reaches the spiritual life, and finally the life divine. That is the procession of the dawn. From the animal, it rises to manhood, and in the end to godhood. But there are intermediaries. The fullness of the realization depends on the fullness of the incarnation. The evil in the body, the evil in the vital, evil in the mind are, whatever their virulence and intransigence, subsidiary agents for the serve only a mightier Lord. The first original sin is death, the god of denial, of non-existence. That is the very source, the fate that terrestrial life involves. This demon, this anti-divine, has to be tracked and destroyed or dissolved into its original origin. This is the nihil that negates the divine, asat, that seeks to nullify sat, and that has created the world of ignorance and misery. That is to say, in its outward pragmatic form. So Savitri sees the one source and knows the remedy. Therefore, she pursues death, pursues him to the end. You know that in Savitri. That is, to the end of death. The luminous energy of the Supreme faces now its own shadow and blazes it up. The flaming light corrodes into the substance of the darkness and makes of it our own. I can't make it. Transfigured substance. This then is the gift that Savitri brings to man. The divine's own immortality, transfiguring the mortality that reigns now upon earth. In view of the necessity of the age for the crucial, critical, and in a way final consummation of nature's evolutionary arch, the Divine Himself has to come down in the fullness of divinity, for only then can the earth be radically changed and wholly transformed. In the beginning, the Divine once came in the beginning, down, but by sacrificing Himself, being pulverized, scattered down, and lost in the infinitudes of a universal, material unconsciousness. Once again, He has to come down. But this time, in the supreme glory of His victorious luminosity. This then is the occult, the symbolic sense of the Mother's gesture, turning away from man with her gifts and returning to the Divine Himself and inviting Him as the chief guest or guest of honor upon the earth. Or in the Vedic image, is to come as the flaming front and leader of the journeying sacrifice. That is this universal existence. So that, don't ask me any question, please. My knowledge doesn't go so far. But I'm sure that what prediction is made will be fulfilled. Sri Aurobindo said, I will come. You remember, supramental body, prepared in the supramental way. But to give you some solace, he has also said, in 40 years' time, there will be a big change. 40 years. So live in hope. That cannot go in vain. We see the changes taking place. Those of you, Sri Aurobindo and Mother are working. Their working is very, very subtle. I was reading a letter of mine to Sri Aurobindo. What is it? I wrote to him boldly. I don't know the context now. For me is Sri Aurobindo, nobody else. Sri Aurobindo alone. And he wrote back, who is Sri Aurobindo? No? If you know it, I congratulate. The world is still like this, science, ignorant. I am he.
So Nirud, thank you very much.